The story of the Zodiac Killer is not the story of a monster hiding in the shadows. It is the story of a monster who stepped into the light, demanded attention, and then simply vanished. It is the single greatest failure of law enforcement in California history, a decades-long silence broken only by the chilling voice of a killer who used words and symbols as his most lethal weapons. Our story begins in the calm, late 1960s suburbs of Northern California, a time of peace and love that was about to be violently interrupted. The date was December 20th, 1968. On a quiet lover's lane near Lake Herman Road in Vallejo, two teenagers were on a first date, 17-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 16-year-old David Faraday. They parked their car, enjoying the last moments of the evening. They were not engaged in anything unusual. They were just young. Around 11:15 p.m., a second car pulled up. A man emerged, approached the victims, and without warning, opened fire. David Faraday was killed instantly outside the car. Betty Lou Jensen tried to run, but she was shot 5 times in the back. The killer left as quickly as he arrived. This was the first confirmed attack. It was brutal, seemingly random, and gave investigators absolutely no clues. 6 months later, on July 4, 1969, the violence escalated. Another lover's lane, this time at the Blue Rock Springs Golf Course, also in Vallejo. 22-year-old Darlene Farron and 20-year-old Michael Majo were sitting in Darlene's car. Again, a car pulled up, paused, and drove away. Moments later, it returned. A man walked up to the passenger side window and shone a flashlight into the car, momentarily blinding the couple. Then, the sound of gunshots filled the air. Darlene Farron died from her injuries. Michael Majo survived, miraculously. His description of the attacker was vague, but crucial. A Caucasian man, slightly heavy, with brown hair. But it was the next day that the killer's true, terrifying persona began to form. July 5, 1969, 12:40 a.m. The Vallejo Police Department received a chilling phone call from a payphone booth a few blocks from Darlene Farron's home. The male voice was calm, controlled, and monotonous. "I want to report a murder," the caller said. He then gave the location of the attack and provided details only the killer could know. He then added a crucial, chilling detail. "I also killed those kids last year at Lake Herman Road." The man was taunting the police. But this was just the beginning of his cruel game. On July 31, 1969, 3 different San Francisco Bay Area newspapers received identical, typewritten letters. These letters confessed to both the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs attacks. But the most sinister part was not the confession. Each letter came with a cryptic, 3-part cipher. The killer demanded that the newspapers publish the cipher on their front page immediately, or he would go on a rampage and commit a dozen more murders. The message was clear. He was not just a killer. He was the conductor of fear, and his name was about to be heard across the world. He had laid his trap, and the media, the police, and the public were about to walk right into it. The newspapers, caught between public safety and refusing to bow to a killer's demands, made their decision. They published the cryptic ciphers. The public was gripped by a mixture of terror and fascination. Who was this person? And what secret message did his bizarre symbols hold? The killer, who had now given himself the name Zodiac through his letters, was not just targeting victims. He was targeting the public's imagination. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to be feared. Just days after the ciphers were published, a breakthrough happened. A schoolteacher named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty, from Salinas, California, managed to crack the first cipher. It wasn't the work of professional code breakers or the FBI. It was an ordinary couple, using ingenuity and patience. What they found inside was horrifying. The cipher was not a complex military code. It was a jumbled, almost nonsensical rant. The killer wrote, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill. Something new is exciting." The message continued, revealing a chilling motive. "I am the killer, and the people are my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." This was not a sane man. This was a man who believed he was gathering slaves for some twisted version of heaven or hell. The lack of a clear motive, the randomness of his victims, and the theatrical nature of his attacks pointed to a pure, unadulterated evil. The Zodiac was now confirmed. His identity, however, remained shrouded in mystery. His game was evolving. He was no longer just a murderer. He was a dark puppet master, pulling the strings of the media and the police. And he was far from finished. On September 27, 1969, the Zodiac struck again. This time, his targets were 20-year-old Brian Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard. They were enjoying a picnic by Lake Berryessa, a popular recreational spot. A man wearing a black, hooded costume, with a bizarre bib-like garment covering his chest, emblazoned with the familiar circle cross Zodiac symbol, approached them. He carried a gun. He tied them up. He then used a knife to brutally stab both Brian and Cecilia multiple times. He left them for dead. Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later. Brian Hartnell, against all odds, survived, providing a vivid description of the bizarre attacker. This was a major escalation. The costume, the knife, the public location. The Zodiac was growing bolder, almost performing his crimes. Immediately after the attack, the killer drove to a payphone. He called the Napa County Sheriff's Office. With the same calm, monotonous voice, he reported the double murder and even carved the Zodiac cross symbol onto the car door of the victims as he departed. He wanted the world to know he was still active, and he wanted to prove he could get away with it. The fear in Northern California was now palpable. The police were under immense pressure. They had a killer who not only committed random acts of extreme violence, but also openly mocked them with letters, ciphers, and phone calls. Every public phone booth, every secluded road, became a potential danger zone. But the Zodiac's most infamous act of terror was yet to come, and it would push the boundaries of his cruel game even further. The pressure on the San Francisco Bay Area police forces was reaching a breaking point. The Zodiac was changing his methods, his targets, and his costumes. The fear was that the randomness was calculated, forcing people to question every dark corner and every strange car. Then came the crime that cemented his legend, the crime that took place not on a lonely lover's lane, but in the heart of San Francisco itself. On October 11, 1969, 29-year-old cab driver Paul Stine picked up a passenger near Mason and Geary Streets. He drove a short route to Washington and Cherry Streets in the wealthy Presidio Heights neighborhood. What happened next remains one of the most brazen acts of violence in the Zodiac's history. The passenger shot Paul Stine point blank in the head. He was not satisfied with just the murder. The killer then spent several minutes meticulously wiping down the cab, stealing Stine's wallet and, chillingly, tearing off a piece of Stine's blood-stained shirt tail. This piece of cloth was not a trophy. It was a message. Moments later, a crucial mistake was made by the San Francisco Police Department, SFPD. 3 teenagers spotted the killer walking away from the cab and immediately called the police. They described the suspect, a man with a crew cut, walking east into the darkness of the Presidio. The radio dispatcher, however, accidentally sent out a description of a black suspect, not a white one. 2 patrol officers, Don Falk and Eric Zelms, responded to the area. They spotted a white man matching the teenager's initial description, walking quickly. Falk even made eye contact with him. They drove right past him, focusing instead on searching for the black suspect they had been told to look for. It is widely believed that Officers Falk and Zelms drove directly past the Zodiac killer just minutes after he had committed his last confirmed murder. The killer, having successfully escaped police custody by sheer luck and bureaucratic error, used the cab driver's bloodied shirt tail as his next piece of evidence. October 14, 1969. The San Francisco Chronicle received a letter. It contained the missing piece of Paul Stine's shirt, confirming the killer's identity. The letter openly mocked the police. "I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington St. and Maple St. last night." The taunting didn't stop there. In the same letter, the Zodiac threatened to start targeting school buses filled with children. This was the threat that truly plunged the Bay Area into mass hysteria. Schools hired extra security, and police patrol cars followed school buses every day, consumed by the fear that the Zodiac might make good on his promise. The police had the shirt tail, they had fingerprints, which were never matched, and they had multiple eyewitness accounts, yet the killer was completely untouchable. The more the police struggled, the more the Zodiac wrote. He started sending more complicated, personalized letters, ciphers, and strange codes, most of which were never solved, including the notorious 340 cipher. He was playing a masterful, terrifying game of chess against the entire city. And with every passing day, the city was losing. The trail was going cold, and the killer was about to retreat into a silence that would last for decades. The confirmed murder stopped after Paul Stine in 1969, but the letters did not. For years, the Zodiac continued his campaign of terror by mail. He sent birthday cards, holiday greetings, and continued to mock the police, often claiming to have murdered far more than the confirmed 5 victims. His goal wasn't just to kill, it was to dominate the narrative. The police were drowning in suspects. Anyone who wrote a strange letter, anyone who owned a gun, anyone who looked vaguely like the police sketch was investigated. But one name consistently dominated the investigation and the public imagination: Arthur Lee Allen. Allen was a resident of Vallejo, the site of the first attacks. He was questioned in 1971 and became the prime suspect for Detective Dave Toschi, the lead investigator who became almost as famous as the killer himself. The evidence against Allen was entirely circumstantial, but compellingly dark. Allen owned a Zodiac brand watch. He wore the military boot size mentioned by one of the survivors. He taught elementary school, a terrifying parallel to the Zodiac's threat to attack school buses. He had told a friend about his desire to hunt humans and mentioned using certain types of bombs, details that later surfaced in Zodiac's letters. He even drove a car with an altered headlight, similar to one seen at the Lake Berryessa attack. But the physical evidence was always a roadblock. Allen's fingerprints did not match those found on the cab. His handwriting samples did not definitively match the Zodiac's eccentric, taunting letters. And, perhaps most damaging of all, his voice on the phone was never confirmed to be the Zodiac's. Allen died in 1992, never having been charged with the crimes. In the 2000s, his DNA was tested against the envelope saliva samples, and again, the results were inconclusive. The prime suspect, the man decades of police work focused on, remained officially unlinked to the terror. The Zodiac's silence became the most deafening part of his legend. After 1974, the letters suddenly stopped. What happened to the killer who craved attention so desperately? The theories are as chilling as the crimes themselves. Did he die? Did he go to prison for an unrelated crime? Or did he simply achieve what he wanted, to prove he was smarter than the system, and then retire? It's often hypothesized that the Zodiac stopped because he achieved ultimate fame. He had terrified a state, shut down schools, made headlines around the world, and successfully played the ultimate game against the police. The challenge was gone. The glory, in his twisted mind, was complete. The case drifted into cold storage, a dark unsolved mystery that continued to haunt San Francisco. The killer's cipher remained uncracked, his identity a void. The police departments, exhausted and defeated, scaled back the investigation. The Zodiac had won. His legacy was the complete erosion of public trust and the terrifying realization that true evil could walk among us, wear a disguise, and then simply melt back into the crowd. But decades later, in the age of the internet and DNA, the case would be briefly dragged back into the light by a bizarre new revelation: the possibility that the Zodiac Killer had never truly been alone. The Zodiac Killer's silence lasted for nearly half a century. The case became a cultural touchstone, generating countless books, movies, and theories. Every new generation of investigators and amateur sleuths faced the same wall: a lack of definitive physical evidence and the killer's almost supernatural ability to disappear. The 21st century, however, brought new hope: DNA technology. Investigators managed to extract partial DNA profiles from the saliva on the stamps and envelopes used by the Zodiac. While the early results were inconclusive, the technique itself offered a path toward justice, even if it led nowhere initially. The mystery continued to deepen, especially with the release of the final, and most crucial, letter from 1974. In this last confirmed communication, the Zodiac seemed to boast about his escape, ending with a chilling reference to the film The Exorcist. Then, nothing. But the greatest twist in the Zodiac narrative came not from the police, but from a private group of independent investigators called the Case Breakers. In 2021, this team, made up of retired law enforcement and military intelligence experts, announced that they had definitively identified the Zodiac killer. Their suspect was a man named Gary Francis Post, an Air Force veteran who had died in 2018. The case breakers presented striking evidence, new forensic information that linked Post's military activities to key Zodiac locations. They claimed to have discovered photographs from Post's darkroom that showed scars matching the Zodiac sketch. Most notably, they claimed that the name, Gary Francis Post, could be used as an anagram for one of the Zodiac's uncracked ciphers, once accounting for a small error in the cipher itself. However, the major law enforcement agencies, the FBI and the SFPD, did not confirm this identification. They maintained that the investigation was still open. The DNA evidence was not definitively linked to Post, and many experts dismissed the anagram claim as a desperate attempt to force the evidence. The problem remained the same. The Zodiac's greatest weapon was ambiguity. Even in death, he continues to cast doubt and chaos over his true identity. The Zodiac is credited with 5 confirmed murders, though his own letters claimed a death toll of 37. Today, the case officially remains unsolved. The partial DNA profiles are stored, waiting for a definitive match. The unsolved ciphers sit in the archives, a final, unreadable insult to law enforcement. The enduring silence of the Zodiac is perhaps the most terrifying part of his legacy. He proved that in the modern world, a man could commit the most spectacular crimes, communicate directly with the world, and then simply vanish without a trace. The story of the Zodiac Killer is a warning, a dark footnote in history that reminds us that some monsters are not defeated by justice, but simply choose to walk away. And somewhere, in the darkness of the Bay Area, the cipher remains uncracked.